Welcome to Medical Imaging Matters, the podcast from AHRA. I am your host, Jason Newmark, and AHRA's Executive Director. Today, we're diving into a topic that often sits in the background, but has a major impact on imaging operations every single day: contrast delivery. From efficiencies and cost to workflows, staffing, imaging quality, and patient throughput, this really is an area that's becoming increasingly strategic, especially in the wake of recent supply challenges. So in this episode, we explore how imaging leaders can take a more data-driven, practical approach to evaluating contrast delivery models. What questions matter most? What misconceptions can you avoid? And how do you choose the right approach for your department? I'm joined by an expert in this area, Doug Boyd, who is the current MRI program director at Smith Chasen College in Arizona. So, ready to be injected with some great tips and ideas? Yeah, pun was intended. On to the show. All right, listeners, welcome back to another episode of Medical Imaging Matters, the podcast by AHRA, the Association for Medical Imaging Management. As you all should know, I'm Jason Newmark, the Executive Director and your host. And today, honestly, a topic that I'm pretty excited about, and one that I will admittedly say I'm not as strongly or well-versed in, but something that's extremely important and, quite honestly, something we probably don't talk about enough. But we're going to get to that in a moment. First, I just want to say that I'm being joined by a fantastic guest today, Doug Boyd. And Doug, do you want to give a little intro?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jason. I appreciate you having me on this podcast. I'm super excited. Like you said, contrast is one of those items that does not get talked about often, and I think it should, especially on some of the items that we're going to be discussing today that I feel that, is very important. And I feel not only it's important, but it's important to the industry, and it's all about education.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, but it is something, right? You usually hear the administrators out there always talking about the next big tool, the big MRI machine, the new outpatient strategy, the new center. And then contrast is one of those sort of like, oh, yeah, I guess we do need contrast to make sure that we're getting good image quality and patient safety and all the things that go with that. But all kidding aside, it's an essential part of kind of how we do imaging in many modalities and the services we provide. So I'm super excited to kind of hear your perspective and your insights on that. So we'll just jump right in and back to the idea, contrast delivery, right? It's one of those topics that we said, sometimes not talked about it as much, but I believe, as we said in our prep for this, it touches on cost, it's workflow, it's how we do staffing and image quality, patient throughput, you name it. Cleaning up if you make a spill or not cleaning up. Maybe just give some perspective now. Why do you think it's so important now that we all pause and just take a moment to really get in there and think about how we're using contrast delivery methods and the type we're using?
Contrast delivery, like I said, is one of those topics that sit quietly in the background until something forces it front and center. Probably in the last few years, several things have done that at the same time, which brings me to, I believe is the most important item that I want to talk about today is the 2022 shortage. That was probably the biggest wake-up call this field has seen in a long time. Many departments discovered how vulnerable they were when they depended on a single vendor or supply chain. When contrast became scarce, there were few backup options available. COVID hit us hard. And as a result, administrators began, looking at contrast management differently, which we've been, as an administrator myself, it's been one of those things that we've been fighting for a long time. And It's no longer just about efficiency and cost. It becomes a matter of operational risk and, most importantly, patient care.
Yeah. Totally agree. I remember just being in my own organization that came through, and a lot of those, like, who do you know? Could you make a phone call? And what happened was, even if you knew someone, they still didn't have it, right? So all your back channels you thought you could play, it was like, they really didn't have it. So yeah, totally in there. As we said, it used to be you could make those back channel calls and find things. Obviously you couldn't. I think it forced people, and I think we talked about this a little bit, sort of how do we deliver the contrast? How are we using contrast? What are our options for contrast so that if it becomes a scarce commodity, are we using it most efficiently and effectively, for those reasons? Thoughts on that, sort of expanding on that?
Yeah, first, what I find generally encouraging is that we now have solid peer-reviewed research that gives us something concrete to evaluate and discuss. We're no longer relying on assumptions or opinions alone. The data tells us a detailed story. And the findings are nuanced in ways that I think are especially valuable for imaging leaders, as you and as I myself, that I would like to dive in today.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's always good to hear what other people are doing and read about something, especially if it's validated research where it has some validity to it. People can just get a perspective of what others are doing. So I'm excited to dive in. Do you think then, based on all these things, like I think we're leading into this, that sort of imaging leaders are asking different questions these days, right? Just both operations and strategically, maybe more than they ever did, just coming out of what went on in 2022.
Yeah, noticeably. I've talked to a lot of folks, imaging directors, administrators, technologists. I'm very fortunate that my wife is a CT technologist. I hear it daily, and even 3 years ago, the conversation was mostly, "What's the cheapest per vial price, and can my staff do it without retraining?" Now I'm hearing what happens if our primary vendor can ship. What's our actual costs when you include waste, prep time, supplies? Honestly, we didn't even choose this delivery model, or did we inherit from a vendor relationship years ago and never look at it again? The last one comes up more than you expect.
Well, that goes back to like I was saying, is I remember even with me, like I left a lot of the decisions to my leaders of the modalities or different people. The radiologist said, look, I'll support you. I'll go negotiate the contract. You're the experts. I didn't know what was showing up. Sometimes the injector wasn't added and other contracts came separately until there was a problem.
Right.
And then it was, oh, what did Jason do? And like, so this is really interesting there. So let me ask this. So I was often asked, right? Now I probably asked my team this a million times. Hey guys, I don't care what you use. What's the best, right? What's the best model to choose a product? What's the best model to deliver it operationally? As long as you're doing that, I'm going to support you. And maybe that's not even the right word to use, and you'll probably come at me on that. But I admit a lot of the senior leaders, we would ask those kind of questions. Any thoughts on that?
I push back on the framing that there even is a best model, Jason. And, what's best? What's the right model for your department? They're not the same thing. Here's an example. So, if you're in a busy academic CT unit, or if you're like, it's for a lot of them for emergencies, and your unit dosing, you're doing 50 plus contrast studies a day. That's a completely different world from a community hospital that's only doing 15 or 20 per scan.
That's right.
Or even an outpatient center. And I would say generally, if you look at the entire US, generally it's 15 to 20 per scanner. I think it's maybe 5 to 10% where they're doing more than 50 plus studies a day on a single scanner. But, the delivery model conversation must start with the understanding of which worlds you actually live in. And I go with 4 things that I always talk about with that vary what your center needs the best. And first is what your daily per scanner contrasts with CT throughput, not annually, average daily, but per scanner. And that's really important. How predictable is your scheduling? Can you run consecutive contrast studies within a defined window? Or is your day all over the place? And that's generally what I see is it's really hard to schedule consecutive contrast studies over and over. We'll talk more about that here in just a few minutes, but the third thing is, what does licensed practitioners coverage look like per shift? The ACR requires direct supervision on site or real-time virtual. And we're seeing that now with the shortage of radiologists and techs as well. What's your real capital budget picture, threshold, and payback tolerance? Not just what the vendor says will pay for itself.
Yeah, I think those are great. And I'm hoping that the people listening just think about that. Those 4 very distinctly easy to follow type of category. Because obviously nuances in each one of those. I mean, I could have a million follow-ups here. Just like, how's your space set up? Can you start contrast outside the room? Or are you doing it all inside the room? Do you have a tech aid to help people get on and off the table? There's a million variables, but I like the way you laid out those 4. Just kind of nice and easy. At least a starting point as you dive in on those. And I think you'd probably agree. Any one of those tweaks, it all changes, right?
Oh,
those
absolutely.
will lead in different directions, right? Yeah, and then like staffing too. I know that's an interesting piece. So someone mentioned this to me the other day, and I said, really, staffing related to contrast? I'm so curious to hear where you're going with that.
Yeah, no, staffing is probably the most unappreciated variable. I mean, and it's probably probably since COVID, just to be fair. I've seen such a shortage of just techs, period. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, it's easy to evaluate the delivery models purely on waste reduction and cost. But if your supervision model can't support the workflow you're designing, none of it works. The delivery model selection must fit within your staffing reality and not to assume it away. And the other thing that we talked about was scheduling. This is where a lot of bulk delivery systems run into trouble in practice, I feel. The economics of those systems depend on dense, predictable contrast utilization within, a defined window. If your scheduling is unpredictable, like I said, when you have lots of gaps, and I'm just going to give some examples. So If you have a bunch of CT heads without contrast, then you throw an abdomen with and without contrast, then you have a chest pelvis, then you go back and you do, you throw a couple cardiacs in there, then you go back and do some withouts with, it's difficult to manage that. So we'll get more into this here in a few minutes, but if you can get with your department and figure out a scheduling structure, there's things here that we're going to talk about today that will work.
It's funny. I never would have thought of that. It's like, it's a whole nuanced conversation. I'm with you. Like, listeners out there, if somebody has figured this out, please let us know. Send us our way. We'd love to talk to you about it, because that's really interesting. Oftentimes scheduling is either done outside the department, or you set up a template and you say these studies can go in certain times. There's nuance here that I never would have thought of. So I'm excited you brought that up. Just something different to think about for efficiency purposes and just the whole process. So it's funny. So then I'm going to go back. This kind of makes you think about maybe misperceptions or misconceptions that people like me or some other leaders are out there. Maybe we weren't thinking of some of these things about contrast delivery. I know I wasn't getting to this level, right? So I'm just curious of your thoughts there too. Like, are there things that jump up that you see people like misconceiving or just not thinking about?
Great question on that. A few come up constantly. So you have annual scan volume. This tells you whether you need a bulk delivery system. It doesn't. Annual volume is a marketing metric. What matters is average daily throughput per scanner per shift. Like what I said a few minutes ago, those are very different numbers. And I've seen departments make significant purchasing decisions based on the wrong one. Second, you have bulk delivery systems universally that tried to reduce the waste. However, there's now a published data showing that below a certain daily volume threshold, they can generate more waste than single dose alternatives, because if you open up a container and you don't use it before the labeled window expires, then, it's just a big waste. That contrast that you wasted is contrast you wouldn't have wasted with a similar approach. And, and that brings me to, switching delivery models is primarily a purchasing decision. It's not. It's a pharmacy decision. I know when I was in practice, we leaned heavily on the pharmacy department. And then, you have infection control decisions, like we talked about, the scheduling redesigns, staffing. Departments that skip these conversations at the front end are the ones who end up calling me late, calling these administrators or corporate and saying, it didn't work the way we expected it,
That's right.
And it's in, the last thing is the usage window. This is the one that is probably the one that I'm concerned the most. The usage windows are product specific. So basically on the manufacturer labeling, some agents are, around certain hours, and that's back and forth depending on who the vendor is. And some MR, especially with MR agents, go longer. It's not a minor detail until it changes the volume threshold and, at which bulk delivery makes sense for a given department. But we always got to confirm with your specific agent's prescribing information and your pharmacy director. And again, we leaned heavily on our pharmacy department.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go back to things that you brought up. You talked a little bit about the volume, and I thought when you talked about, so I think you said the multi-dose, so like what that works, you said, hey, in a larger place, it might be very different than a smaller place. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about the volume influences. I think is really interesting, like how you're explaining that. As well as, I think you also referenced some research earlier. So maybe in combination, because I believe there's an article out there that talks about this, and it was really interesting to read. And maybe you can just share, with the listeners, what the article was or where it was published, and then just maybe give some insights there. So I think it's a really interesting way to bring in what you mentioned earlier about the power of research and seeing what's out there. But your comment on volume, I think, is really interesting.
There was an article, and I refer this when centers call me or ask me, what I think. And the one that comes into mind is the one from the Department of the Radiologic Sciences at the University of California, Irvine. That was published in the Academic Radiology in 2025. Dr. Rafi Alvi and her team found annual cost waste was 86% compared to single dose across 12,000 scans, which you have multi-dose and then you have the single, and this is real. But if it comes from a high volume CT unit that averages 33 plus a day, when you break it down by daily volume group, the picture changes significantly. But here's the other caveat to that. So if, your CT department is under 10 patients per day, Multi-dose systems generate 2.5 times more waste than a single dose, which is a really big deal. So let's go a little further. And this is pretty much, like I said before, is the bulk of departments when they're doing 10 to 19 a day, 71% more waste than multi-dose. The crossover where multi-dose starts outperforming single dose happens around 20 patients per day.
Yeah, because you're using up all the contrast, right? Waste is, got it. Okay.
Yeah, correct. And then at 40 or above, waste is 0. 50, waste is 0. And that's what makes this research so practically useful, and it gives us leaders a concrete number to check against before they evaluate any delivery system. And that number is a daily per scanner throughput, not an annual case count. And I just want to be very clear on that, because if you're judging what you're doing annually, then your numbers are going to be skewed off. And I have like a quick reference, and maybe we can post this for your listeners out there. So,
yeah,
under 10 a day, multi-dose generates 2.5 times more waste than a single dose. 10 to 19 per day, still 71% more waste than multi-dose. 20 to 29, 54% less waste with multi-dose crossover point. And then 30 to 39 a day, 89% less waste. And then as you get up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there's no waste at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And I'm sure people know, look at the research. If somebody's questioning it, saying, how can that be? They can read it and its perspective. And I'm sure there's questions that I really like some of those points. It just, the key here is you're driving as you got to think about that volume on any given day. How people are coming through, how you're utilizing that stuff so you're not wasting things, right? That's the goal, is to optimize that, which gets back to the topic of scheduling, which if you create your schedule and people are coming in, then you could open up multi-dose. Otherwise, maybe it doesn't make sense to do so. It's really interesting on there. How about this then? So we talked about staff, we talked about scheduling, and just maybe this is kind of me saying similar stuff, but like, what about the variability that happens just in workflows and how people use their contrast, and just, I don't know, how they're bringing the patient in, how they're setting the machines up, how are they getting the rooms ready? I think of a million things that go on here as well. Thoughts on there? Does that also add some variability here?
Oh, absolutely. First, I just want to give a volume perspective. So most outpatient CT and MR departments run 9 to 16 hour weekday schedules, not 24-hour continuous operations, which brings me to my first point. So say a department schedules 25 contrast CT studies per scanner per day. Mm-hmm. There's a maintenance gap in the morning. A couple patients don't show in the afternoon. The exam, like, we talked about, they're mixing, CT heads with cardiacs and abdomen and pelvises. That's where it's hard to predict. The actual utilization pattern within any given container window might look at more like 10 to 12 than 25. So there's a big gap there. Mm-hmm. And you're back in the territory where a bulk delivery system isn't helping you. For some fix or some departments is blocking their schedule, designating specific time windows as contrast only, and running those exams consecutively. That changes the utilization math, even at a moderate daily volumes, because the container is being used in a denser, more predictable way. But and it's a scheduling change, not a delivery model change. It doesn't cost anything.
Yeah. It's just a sense of, I was really, you gotta take time and just really think about how you're setting up those workflows and then find doing that. Because the problem is you have people like, and I'm going to pick on myself, people like me back in the day, right? So here comes the administrator, and all I'm doing is saying costs, financials, what is going on here, right? Either one, why are more pages coming through, or two, what are we doing? I leave money on the table because I want the machines going, running. Every time it's quiet, not good, right? I want to move in. So I don't know. Thoughts on that? Because obviously it shouldn't all be financials, but I'm just being reality. Like, that's a lot of times that does drive things, right? Is the financial question.
Yeah, as this where I see a lot of decision go sideways. Departments compare per-vial prices and think that's the cost conversation,
right?
But it's not even close to the full picture. So the real cost of contrast delivery includes the media itself, but also how much of you're really throwing away. What you're spending on supplies. Supplies nowadays are expensive. A box of syringes, even the tubing and saline nowadays, the cost have come up drastically. And, if you're buying into a new system and how much the technologist time goes into that prep per patient, that last one gets underestimated constantly. If you're doing 40 patients a day and you save 30 seconds per patient on prep, That's 20 minutes of recovered scanner capacity every single day. Yeah,
Right.
your billing rate for a contrast CT, that adds up in a hurry. I did a study, Jason, in 2019. I actually was at AHRA on showing the difference between, how long does it really take to load up a CT injector? And it was astronomically so important. People didn't realize how much time is put into loading up an injector.
Right.
But
And doing it carefully and safely and all things that go with it, right?
exactly, scrub the hub, making
Yeah.
sure that, you don't cause any infection, no air bubbles, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But almost nobody models the throughput impact, even though it's potentially the biggest number. A delivery model change that enables one more contrast study per day is a real revenue over a year.
Yeah.
That should be part of the conversation, and it really is. And again, on top of that, you get one more patient in that day that really needs that
That's
stuff.
right. Access. Exactly. You get access, which is sometimes even more important. Yep.
Absolutely.
Got it. Do you see some of these things? So again, I mean, I know I'm diving into the more where I'm looking for access. I want to look like we differentiate for our competitors. It's not hard to come through. But back to the financial stuff. Do you see anything else that changes at all around high volume systems or the lower, like, or maybe they're not putting much volume through, or these variability we've been talking about? Do you see things kind of jump around there a little bit?
Yes. Let's start off with high volume settings. So
Yeah.
if you're above 40 per scanner per day, capital investment in bulk delivery systems can generally pay off. Published data from a large academic medical center showed capital recovered in about 6 months with over $500,000 in annual savings. That pays for a lot.
Yeah.
Those numbers are real, but they're real at the volume with consistent throughput.
Yeah.
Now, when you get into community hospitals or moderate volume settings, this is where I see the most mismatched expectations. Vendors often model the financial case at volumes 20 to 30% higher than a department's actual daily throughput. But if you plug in those real numbers, and the payback period stretches significantly. For a lot of departments in this range, the smarter immediate move is weight-based dosing. No capital required, no delivery format change. And again, the published data shows meaningful savings just from the protocol adjustment. And that's the other thing we could probably do another podcast on, is how are we setting up our protocols as well? I know that's really big in MRI right now with AI and stuff. So it's going to be interesting here in the next few years on how that's going to be incorporated. But lastly, I mean, and it depends on the variable outpatient environments. So flexibility and procurement usually matters more than the format here. But the bulk container economics depend on dense, predictable utilization with a defined window. So most outpatient schedules don't give you that by default. So pre-filled syringes or right-size single-dose vials with weight-based dose often pencil out better than any, and they give you options if there's a supply disruption like what we had in 2022.
Right. That's correct. I'm learning a ton here. It's funny. I wish I had done this back in the day when I was actually in the departments everywhere instead of in this role. So let me think about it this way. If I was back on my seat, or if there's imaging leaders out there now that maybe they're not the CT tech or the MRI tech. Maybe it's somebody who's now managing a new modality they haven't managed before, or maybe they are those leaders. But would you throw out, based on what we've been talking through, a couple thoughts on where they should begin in terms of evaluating this, their just the contrast workflows and how they're doing things like that? Just kind of wrapping us some of the takeaways here. But does that make sense? Kind of thoughts on that?
Yes. Yeah. One number: average daily per scanner contrast CT vinyl. So note the year, not the month. The whole department daily per scanner. So pull 90 days of data and calculate it. If you don't have that number, everything else is somewhat theoretical. But once you have it, here's some of the questions I would work through. Is my daily volume above or below 20 per scanner? This is the first gate from research. Above 20, bulks delivery starts making sense. Below it, other approaches are likely to serve you better. Second is, how predictable is my scheduling? And this is a killer. And I see this not only just in CT, but I see this in other departments as well. But not how many studies I book, but how many do you actually complete? And in what order, with what gaps? This determines the real utilization within that container window. And then, third is, what does my waste really actually look like? Do I track how much contrast is loaded versus how much gets administered? Most departments don't.
I was gonna bet that. That's right. Probably just you're going so quickly you're gonna move through. Yeah.
Most departments, they're averaging, 7 to 10 minutes. These busy departments are averaging 7 minutes per patient. It's amazing the throughput. And there's no way that you're going to be able to sit back and say, well, how much did I use? How much did I, waste? But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, starting with tracking, I mean, it costs nothing, right?
Right. Assigning someone to do it and make it an everyday type of activity or every exam activity at that level. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, what does my supervision model look like? Is it compliant with the AC, with the current ACR guidelines? And, lastly, am I optimizing flexibility, efficiency, or throughput? Because those can point toward different answers in the post 2022. Flexibility has become a legitimate strategic priority in its own right, I feel. And before you change it, anything, pilot it. Try it out. Try it out on one scanner for 90 days and use all the metrics you can possibly. Every department I've talked to that went straight to system-wide conversation without a pilot wishes that they've taken that step first.
That's right. Well, I can imagine most people probably think, hey, I have a good department. We're doing just fine, but maybe they don't know. Exactly. Which makes me think, otherwise you were saying that, I'm like, all right, how would I know? Is there a red flag? Is there an alert going off somewhere? Do I need some external person to come in? Like, what are your thoughts around that? Like, if maybe someone thinks they're doing really well, but you're like, wait a minute. In my experience, I've seen a couple things that trust maybe take you. These to sort of start, right? What are there anything you think of like those? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, you can't answer what what our daily per scanner contrast CT volume in a 5-minute conversation. You're using a vendor's financial model without plugging in your actual daily throughput numbers. And I feel that's a real issue. And hopefully what I've said today will help your department.
Yeah.
Basically, are you looking at your delivery model before 2022? That's also a factor. And then also you've made a delivery model change without a pilot and something isn't working as expected. I'm a big believer in pilots. We used to pilot things all the time, especially with where I worked at. But nobody in your department owes contrast delivery program oversight. It just kind of happens.
I think, that's probably more often than not. To have someone that's actually in charge of looking at that, whether it is in the CT world, whether it's in the MRI world, other modality, but having someone, because we used to often say we have people work, we needed a special project done, and we pull a piece of someone. But they were trying to do 70 other things. The piece never got done. What it got done is when we said, hey, Doug, Jason, you are now released some other duties to be able to focus on this. And maybe to your point, just do it for a few weeks and see if you can pilot something, dive in, check out the data, see what's there, identify a couple opportunities and enroll. Because a lot of stuff you're mentioning it doesn't seem like a very heavy lift. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but it just seems like taking the time and just looking at the data. So on that same note, maybe I'm just kind of thinking this through too. Are there other trends that you think are coming down the pipeline around contrast? Like obviously we knew the shortage. Are there other things that are happening maybe that you see now, or maybe from what you're seeing and reading that's coming down the pipeline that just adds a little more oomph to this of why this is important today? Take time to have a conversation.
There's a few things I'm watching closely, Jason, and the weight-based and precision dosing. We already have research published savings of anywhere from a few thousand to over 100,000 a year, depending on, patient mix and, no capital required. Most departments haven't implemented that yet. So the next step beyond that is what I just said a little bit ago about AI assisted dosing, that individualizes contrast volume based on body composition, the renal function, and the clinical indication. The direction is right for the right patient as a standard, not a optimization. Then we go to data-driven management. More departments are starting to build contrast program dashboards, tracking volume, waste rate, cost per exam, throughput. That's a shift from, managing contrast by feeling, to managing it like any other operational program. Decisions become more defensible and more accurate. I am a big checklist person. And it doesn't take much to, like you said, that heavy lift. There's not much heavy lifting than getting a checklist going. And I think one of my most important things as a technologist is that staffing pressure. The radiologist workforce projections are not encouraged at all. I know where my wife works, they used to have 12 radiologists before 2022, and now they're down to half that. It's scary out there. And
Right.
delivery models that reduce per exam prep burden and support virtual supervision workflows are going to have to increase the operational advantage as staffing gets tighter. I don't see it getting any better in the next 5 years. So
Right.
efficiency isn't just a cost argument, it's a sustainable argument, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think to your point earlier, just having data and having data-driven type of assessments just helps so much. So,
Yes.
there's so many good takeaways from our chat, and I have a million follow-up questions. So I'm glad that now I have your contact info. Speaking of that, by the way, if anybody wants to reach you at all or ask questions on the call, okay, is it easy to find you on LinkedIn? Is there an email that you want to share? Just the best way to reach you?
Yes, you can reach me anytime on LinkedIn, or you can reach me at magneticminds@gmail.com.
Okay. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot through here. And I think my takeaways here are take the time to do an assessment, right? Look at your volumes, and then you can decide what the contrast delivery model makes sense to you. And I really like the discussion on the multi-dose versus the single. That's just really interesting, right? And how that goes through, and there are really some good numbers and some good research that's there. I love the idea that it's a collaboration between your technologists and the leads who were in those areas and know well, your radiologists, maybe your corporate partner. I think they should be involved, right? Because they should have a want for you to be efficient, and your administrator, right? There comes the finance part. And I love what you said is about try it. Like, why not go in there and look? Maybe there's something there. Maybe it's one extra patient, like you said. Maybe it's a couple dollars saved here or there. But I'm vetting through it all. It'll help you just have a better operations, a better program overall, and plan for what's coming down the pipeline versus it being a surprise. Like you said, 22, boom, everybody's reacting to it. Like, now what do we do? But I think it's at the end of the day, to me, it's make time for it. Why not? Is it a topic that's not talked about a lot? Maybe it should be talked about more. I really appreciate you taking time today. I don't know if you have any closing words, but
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And we need to be prepared. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We could have another 2022. And if we're not out there piloting or trying new things, again, I'm a big checklist person. I say this all the time. It's not a heavy lift at all. If you need any references or anything that I can help with, please, like you said, send me an email. I do that a lot with my current position that I'm at right now. It's in the educational world, but I've brought that from my administrative world into the educational world. And I believe, checklists and pilots are so important.
All right. So one more thing to add in closing, almost forgot. Based on what we talked about today, I think Doug brought up some really great points. We are going to have a contrast delivery assessment tool that's going to have those categories that focus on that Doug mentioned earlier in the talk, as well as the checklist concepts and what are those elements. And that should be available in the show notes. So if you go down, you'll see a little link to be able to download that on your own. Please go that route. If you can't find or have any questions, you can reach out to me and I will get it for you. But that'll be a fantastic resource for you.
I want to add as well, the reference that I talked about, which was the study that the Department of Radiologic Sciences at the University of California in Irvine that was published in the Radiology of 2025 will be down in the show notes as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Medical Imaging Matters, a podcast from AHRA, the Association for Medical Imaging Management. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. AHRA is proud to be the trusted association for medical imaging management professionals, offering career development programs, a comprehensive selection of educational conferences and seminars, networking opportunities, award-winning publications, the certified radiology CRA credential, and so much more. To discover all AHRA has to offer, visit our website at ahra.org. Until next time,